Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us today. I must say that when I read the program, I found there was a very interesting line, I will quote, about Europe and Russia moving towards a new era. I found this one very, very interesting, and I was wondering if perhaps you can tell us a bit more about this. All yours.
Thank you. Καλημέρα σε όλους. Σας χαιρετώ στα ελληνικά. Η Αθήνα ήταν το πρώτο μου διπλωματικό πόστο πριν 40 και πλέον χρόνια, αλλά για χάρη του Διεθνούς Ακροατηρίου θα μιλήσω αγγλικά. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here today addressing another Economist conference. It almost started to look like a tradition, holding them at moments coinciding with turning points in Greek political life. Hopefully, these are now over, and Greece will enjoy a period of upward economic development and progress in relations with its neighbors and other countries, including certainly my own. At least that's what the new government is saying. I also noted that as this session was being prepared, they dropped the question mark at the end of the title, which I see as a major political signal. As far as Russia-EU relations are concerned, 2019 is a special year. It is particularly pleasant to mention that our Partnership and Cooperation Agreement was signed on the 24th of June, 1994, here in Greece, on the island of Kerkera. This document, which formed the basis for building economic relations, a multi-layered structure for cooperation, and established a framework for political dialogue, remains to this day the legal foundation for comprehensive development of Russia-EU dialogue on a wide range of issues. Also, in December, we will celebrate 30 years of diplomatic relations with the then European communities. Over the past years, our partnership with the EU has had its ups and downs. In my opinion, the fact that in 2012, Russia and the EU traded at the level of €1 billion a day is a spectacular example of the scale of our cooperation. I can only add to this that the current abnormal state of our relations does not correspond in any way to the objective interests of our countries and peoples. In the meantime, we are witnessing certain processes unfolding in Europe and beyond. The basically objective globalization process did not follow the path that those who had originally envisaged it as a means to ensure triumph of the Western liberal world order expected. It became obvious that other continents and centers of power, rather than the traditional West, were starting to play an increasingly decisive role in it. Needless to say, all these trends combined have led to a crisis of dominance of the liberal area. And on this, I happen to disagree with some of the previous speakers. As a result, states that previously advocated the principles of free trade and fair competition started using the language of trade wars and sanctions. Even the toolbox of Western intervention against competitors, including some previously close allies, was adjusted to include provocations, disinformation, attribution, and sanctions, the latter viewed as the favorite instrument of diplomacy. Increasingly, attempts are being made to act in circumvention of international law, to willfully interpret generally recognized approaches, presenting that as some kind of a rules-based order. Moreover, these rules are elaborated privately, by a small group of countries and are fine-tuned according to the changing political environment. In fact, such an order implies double or sometimes even triple standards. Some countries consider themselves to be bound by neither the law or even the rules. Others are obliged to act in transatlantic solidarity with them, and the third group can be accused of anything without evidence of wrongdoing. Obviously, such state of affairs cannot be deemed acceptable to us. We are against political diktat and blackmail in international cooperation. We condemn the desire of certain countries and politicians to assign themselves the right to determine the feasibility and valid parameters of legitimate cooperation between other states. Perhaps future historians will judge all this as an inadequate response to the demise of the international world order. Good for them. But today we all need to face the current controversial realities in a way that wouldn't exacerbate the global state of affairs. Unfortunately, nowadays misperceptions of different issues are quite frequent. When Russia is the topic, the first thing that pops up, often blocking the real picture, are the alleged hybrid threats and fairy tales about interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Regrettably, I have to state that in this regard, Europe has been following the American way. Since 2016, when the so-called Russian collusion story was instrumentalized in the US as a means of internal political leverage, discussing anything with Washington in a serious manner became next to impossible. But let me assure you, we're still trying. In full recognition of the huge responsibilities our two countries bear to maintain global security and stability. Unfortunately, now it appears to be the turn of EU member states to use Russia as a pretext to settle scores and resolve disputes. Let me give you a fresh example. Last May, a huge scandal erupted in Austria concerning the leaders of the Freedom Party, which was then part of the government coalition. The whole thing turned out to be a clear setup, a classical provocation, with the result, collapse of the Austrian government. And I would like to stress that it was Vienna who, among others, had often advocated for improving the EU-Russia relationship. One more example of above-mentioned misperceptions is the assessment of Russia's role in the Balkans, including its historical aspect, which is sometimes perceived in a distorted manner. To my mind, this is unfair, because my country is simply accustomed to calling things by their proper names and does not shy away from doing so, especially when we're talking about breaches of international law. For instance, many blamed Russia for interference in internal affairs of Greece and what is now Northern Macedonia, as they were drafting the Prespa Agreement, though such accusations didn't have any ground. The only thing Russia did was to state obvious shortcomings of that document, and in particular of the procedures involved in its promotion in the light of constitutional and international law. I believe that no genuine professional in the sphere of international relations would contest the fact that, notwithstanding its significant sacrifice for the sake of freedom of independence of the Balkan nations, Russia, contrary to some others, does not aspire to any exclusive rights here, does not impose friends or enemies on the Balkan nations. We are ready to cooperate with the EU and its member states, among them definitely Greece, on the Balkans, including on helping to settle remaining conflicts in the region. Now, what is going to happen with the Russia-EU relations in the next, say, 30 years? Figuratively speaking, I reckon that today we are at a crossroads. We need to jointly define the direction of our cooperation, something that is made more difficult by the current state of affairs within the EU, which is engulfed by its own internal problems. There are ongoing debates on the principles of its functioning, on identity, on economic perspective, on the balance of the national and supranational, and reflection on external factors influencing internal processes within the EU. All these factors put together seem to limit Brussels' ability to maintain substantive dialogue with third countries, including Russia. Nevertheless, we should not be discouraged by that. Economic, cultural, and historic ties between Russia and EU member states are so important that the new cycle of normal and even closer relations is inevitable. It will become possible when the EU defines the model of its future development and starts to understand how to address current global challenges. Putting it bluntly, in order to maintain its position in an increasingly competitive multipolar world, the EU and its member states need to start thinking of uniting their efforts with other pillars of our common Eurasian civilization, primarily Russia. After all, our common geography, defined, for example, by certain EU leaders as us sharing the same land mass. Well, I personally believe we share much more than just land mass. Pushes us to respond collectively to transborder threats such as terrorism and drug trafficking. We're facing universal challenges regarding the adaptation to demographic and climate changes in the world, as well as the establishment of a new model of innovative economy and modernization of its technological basis. It is absolutely evident that coupling the economic potentials of the two largest integration projects on our continent, the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union, can only bring added value. I cannot conclude without admitting that certain signs of understanding of the need to revitalize Russia-EU dialogue are emerging. There have been a number of high-level contacts in the last weeks and months, let's hope that politicians who are getting EU top jobs this year will show enough pragmatism to start overcoming the inertia we now see in EU-Russia relationship. As they say in Greece, you help me, I help you, and together we climb the mountain. My personal conviction leads me to believe that our future relations with the EU will not be a simplistic return to business as usual. Actually, both sides have admitted their lack of desire to restart a search of adjectives, choosing among strategic, advanced, priority, or other partnership. I believe we should focus more on substance rather than slogans, thinking more of a pragmatic approach based on mutual interests. If that is how we describe the top of that mountain, then it will be well within reach. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. For full disclosure, I was a French diplomat in Russia in 2014, so I was well placed to see the downfall in EU-Russia relations. I think we would all agree that we're still friends. However, to get away from the current situation, which I'm sure you would agree is tense, what steps do you think are needed from Russia and from the EU to get away from the current relation and have a better relationship in the future? Concrete steps.
Well, I think I've outlined the vector of future development. A very elaborate architecture of our cooperation that took quite an effort and several years to develop, and I was part of that joint effort. Most of it is now frozen. We used to have 2 summits a year. We used to have ministerial meetings on a regular basis. Sectoral cooperation, sectoral dialogues. now the issue is not to restart them in the form of business as usual. I think we should indeed work together towards a new paradigm of relationship, which would be more pragmatic, perhaps less emotional, but certainly more substance-oriented. And what we need are efforts on both sides, of course. I cannot say that everything is frozen, no. Political dialogue is pretty much alive, including at ministerial level. I mean, between Minister Lavrov and High Representative Mogherini. Also, we have a full network of expert-level consultants. We cooperate quite well, and I would say quite constructively on a number of international issues. Iran was mentioned in this hall earlier today, JCPOA, Middle East. We are cooperating on Latin America quite extensively, and a number of other issues. We do cooperate on counterterrorism. There will be another high-level meeting on that later this year in October, most probably, and also on a number of issues. But what we need is enough political will to start things moving, really. When that political will, when I sometimes refer to the terminology of nuclear physics, when the EU manages to get a critical mass of political will, nothing will explode, but things will start moving.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and we're going to move to the next session now. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.